Good morning, my friends. I am Professor A G Nostic, Distinguished Professor of Secularism at the University of Carnality, an esteemed institution with branches all around the world. I was last here with you in the early days of your pastor's ministry, nearly 20 years ago now. And you still listen to this man's teaching. You foolish people. Well, it is an honor to be with you today. Indeed, it is a necessity. I only hope that I have not come too late. Now, I first met your pastor back when he was a student at the University of Iowa in the early 1980s, where I taught a class required for all freshmen called Classical and Biblical Literature. Your pastor was surprised to learn that I, a convinced atheist, would teach the Bible. But of course I would teach the Bible, the same way a doctor would fight disease, or an activist would fight corruption. The Bible is arguably the most pernicious book ever penned by men, responsible for incalculable blindness, superstition, and human misery. Every year, hundreds of young freshmen would parade into my class, and it would be my privilege to set them free. I liberated thousands of young minds in my tenure, with rare exception, such as with your pastor, who had the audacity to say to me on the last day of class, "Professor Nostic, I want to thank you." "For what?" I asked. And his answer, and to this day it still brings a slight sensation of nausea. His answer, "For making my faith in Jesus stronger." I was aghast, speechless, I who am not often at a loss for words. But when I gathered myself together, I looked him in the eyes and I asked, "How is that possible?" Well, I will share his answer with you at the end of my lecture. Suffice it to say, since that time, wherever your pastor has served in a church, he has invited me to come and speak. And every time he invites me, it's with the same exact words. "Professor Nostic, I want you to do for my people what you did for me." Well, I know a challenge when I hear it. I recognize an opportunity when I see it. So I am here today. Surely it is in the nick of time. I have been researching what your pastor has been teaching you in recent months. It seems he has landed on this theme of sharing your faith in Jesus with others, transmitting your values and beliefs to those who do not presently hold them, passing on the baton of your troublesome faith to the next generation. There is so much to undo today and so little time to undo it. But I am keen to try. And so the title of my lecture today, and I will base these words on the 16th and 17th chapter of the book of Acts. The title of my lecture, 5 Behaviors to Avoid, if you wish to avoid evangelism. Now, as we begin, I recognize that I have one clear advantage over your pastor. You see, I know what he knows. That deep in your heart of hearts, you do not want to share your faith. Oh, he's tried so very hard to convince you of the importance of this. But this subject makes you as queasy as it does me. And it is not that you do not wish there to be more Christians on the earth. I was not born yesterday. Of course you desire this. But you fear the thought that you might be the one, that God might use as his instrument to bring this to pass. Oh, that sets your knees to knocking. What shall I say? What if they ask me a question I can't answer? What if they make fun of me? I have many friends on Facebook. I don't want to lose any. They'll think I'm strange. Oh, they will, and you are. And so in a sense, my task today is to convince you to avoid that which you already wish to avoid. Shouldn't be too hard. I'm trying to convince a novice parachutist not to leap from the plane. As I said, your pastor has had us several weeks jump on me. He has had time to soften you up. Let's see if I can bring you to your senses. So, 5 behaviors to avoid. If you wish to avoid evangelism, let us proceed with behavior number 1. You must avoid big thinking. Avoid big thinking. You have no cheats. Jot these down, these important points I will share with you today. Now, a person who is good at evangelism is able to think about things that the average person does not ordinarily or easily think about. The average person thinks about this life only, this earth only. As the person who is good at evangelism often is able to think of eternity, often has heaven in their line of sight. The average person is riveted on themselves, their needs, their worries, their concerns, me, me, me. The person who shares their faith with others often carves room out of their heart for others and for God and His agenda. Now, the person who models this type of big thinking more than any other in the Bible is your apostle Paul, who at the beginning of chapter 16 gets a big idea in his brain. He wants to go on a second missionary journey, as though one were not bad enough. Let's read the words that the author Luke gives to us here. Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was a Jewess and a believer, but whose father was a Greek. Good man. The brothers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey, referencing a decision made in the prior chapter that circumcision was no longer needed for conversion. And so the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in numbers. Now, I think of a great leader like Paul, and it makes my heart so sad. He could have done so much with his life, had possessed such amazing talent, if only he hadn't gotten tangled up with Christianity. But like all big thinkers, Paul did 3 things very well. He understood the power of vision and planning. He also placed a high priority on recruiting and training, and he was a master communicator. Now his vision, of course, was to expand the sphere of the influence of Christianity. A dreadful vision, mind you, but it gave him focus for his life and put fire in his belly. That's what vision does for big thinkers. Small thinkers are stuck in the moment. They live day to day and paycheck to paycheck, aiming for nothing, living for nothing, occupying space, wasting the gift of time they are given, wondering most mornings, should I even get out of bed? Not so with big thinkers. A person of vision knows what they want to do with their life, and they have an idea of how they're going to get there. You see, vision must always be accompanied by a plan. Vision without a plan is a mirage. Small thinkers will tell you their dreams. They will paint you a picture in the clouds of what they will do and what they will become one day. And that's as far as it gets them. Big thinkers, though, know how to think strategically. Now, why did Paul circumcise young Timothy? As I alluded to, it had already been decided in the earlier chapter that this was no longer a requirement. Has Paul forgotten this decision already? Is he that daft? No, No! Paul's a big thinker. He's thinking strategically. He understands the human heart and how difficult it is for people to accept change. He knows that time will be needed, much time, for people to accept the idea of circumcision-free conversion. Many will struggle with this. Many will not give Paul and his gospel a fair hearing simply because of his young friend with a Greek father who is uncircumcised. And so with one master stroke, no pun intended. Well, actually the pun was intended. With one master stroke, Paul eliminates that roadblock. Paul clears away the obstacle so that his listeners can listen by asking young Timothy to accept circumcision. It's brilliant, but then Paul's a big thinker. We also see with Paul that he placed a high priority on recruiting and training. He understands that vision without helpers, vision without investors will get him nowhere. And so everywhere we look in the Bible, he's gathering people about himself, forming a veritable seminary around him. First Barnabas, then Silas, here Timothy, later Titus, Epaphroditus. You have the makings of such a mindset brewing here. As I said, I was listening to sermons of the past month that had been delivered here, and I came across one that was taught by a young woman named Heather, and I listened to this teaching, and it was good. Your pastor would open up his pulpit to teach others to teach. He would raise up a platoon here of small group leaders. He would share the caregiving load with deacons and deaconesses. He would work with a group of elders in a strategic planning process. You best stop this sort of thinking right now, my friends, or you know what will happen. You will begin to grow. Yes, but I suppose that is what you desire. I suppose some of you, many of you, perhaps aspire to be more than you are now. I suppose I'm looking at a room full of future teachers, future deacons and deaconesses, future evangelists. I suppose I'm looking at a room of future former sinners, future former simpletons. Why don't you just be an ordinary church filled with small thinkers who say to themselves, oh, we'll leave that evangelism rubbish to the pastor. We'll leave this growing in Christ rubbish to the professionals. Our lives are quite rich and full as they are right now. We'll just come on Sunday and place our money in the offering plate and be on our way. Thank you very much. No, that's not good enough for some of you. You desire to be big thinkers, but look where it gets you, because Paul was a big thinker who understood vision and planning and recruited and trained well and was a master communicator. We have verse 5 to roll our eyes at. So the churches were strengthened in faith and grew daily in numbers. You want that to happen here in Bristol? Goodness, I hope not. I hope I have not come too late. Avoid big thinking, my friends. Now, secondly, as Acts 16 unfolds, we see a second thing that Paul and his friends did with frequency, and whenever they engaged in this behavior, it tended to stimulate evangelism. So if you wish to avoid evangelism, you must avoid this behavior. And of course, we are talking about the loathsome subject of prayer. References to prayer are scattered throughout the telling. Verse 9. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. And so they sailed on to Philippi. You say, but Professor Gnostic, I don't see prayer in those verses. But what is prayer? Prayer is communication with the deity. And what do we see here? We see the deity communicating with them. So obviously they have placed themselves in a position where they can listen, i.e., they are praying. And just look at the madness that follows. Paul and his friends obey the vision. They go to Macedonia. They come to the town of Philippi. What's the first thing that they do? We read in verse 13 now. On the Sabbath we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. And what happens? They begin speaking to the people gathered there, and an influential woman named Lydia is brought to faith. And she goes and brings her family to the faith. How did all this madness begin? With prayer. Continuing on, verse 16 tells us what happens next. Once, when we were going to the place of prayer, oh, Paul, would you stop, please? You're giving me a headache. And then follows the tale of how Paul stirs up a hornet's nest within Philippi. And by the time the sun sets that day, he and Silas have been arrested and placed within the city jail. And what do we find them doing? Yet again, we find them praying. And again, God answers their prayer and comes in a remarkable fashion, leading to the conversion of a jailer and his family. Yet more people hoodwinked into believing in an imaginary God. Friends, if only you'd cut out the prayer. You'd cut out being led of God. If you cut out being led of God, you'd stop the evangelism. You stop the evangelism, you cut off the flow of converts. This is not complicated. And so, dear friends, stop with the praying. Oh, God, make me a fisher of men. Oh, Jesus, give me boldness to speak. Oh, Holy Spirit, grant me opportunities to share my faith with others. Put your words in me. Help me plant the seeds of your kingdom. Stop with all of that, dear friends. Stop with prayer. It will lead you to nothing but trouble. Now, there's a third thing to avoid. It is found in verse 25. We pick up the story. We find Paul and Silas in that cold, damp jail cell. And what do we find them doing? Well, yes, you can figure some of this out. Verse 25, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying. It's everywhere you look. It's like mold in the bathroom. You can't be rid of it. They were praying and singing hymns to God. And the other prisoners were listening to them. This is even worse. For this is not only prayer, but prayer that is connected to something else that makes it even more pernicious. And so if you want to avoid evangelism, then you must avoid this third behavior. Avoid joy and contentment. Purge it from your life. No joy in Jesus for you. Out with you, O happiness from my faith. Begone, levity, mirth, and contentment. We'll have none of it here. I assure you, dear friends, if God had commanded me to go to a certain city and preach his gospel, and if, as a result of my obedience, I went to that place and preached his gospel, and was attacked by the public, and then arrested and thrown in stocks and chains and thrown in the intestines of the city jail, come midnight, I would not have been singing. It is moments like this for which tequila was invented. Certainly, if I had been Silas, I would have turned to Paul and said, that's the last time we listened to one of your dreams. No. We find them praying and singing, resting contentedly in the will of the Father. And as a result, we're told that the prisoners are listening, and the implication is they're listening with interest and attraction, but that's not the worst of it. As they pray and sing, God intervenes, sends in an earthquake. Not one that topples buildings, but a gentle earthquake, one that breaks open prison doors and unlatches chains. And by the time the dust all settles from this little tremor, the jailer and his family are converted. Do you see what joy and contentment in Jesus will get you? Obviously, if you wish to avoid evangelism, then you must put this out of your life. Because once you start feeling good about something, once you start experiencing good in something, well, you're going to want to tell others about it. Or worse yet, they'll see it in your face. They'll say, "My, you have a bounce in your step today. What's up with you?" And you might just have the audacity to tell them that you love Jesus and the lessons he's taught you and the life he's brought you and the forgiveness he's showered on you and the promises he's made and the peace he's provided, even when you're in circumstances that dictate you should not have peace. Experiencing joy through faith is really a horrible thing. When I think of religion, I don't think of joy. I think of misery and sin and guilt, hell, an endless list of rules. Do this or do that, or the Almighty will smite you like a bug. I don't see happy people in churches. I see depression and guilt and boredom written all over the place. People who speak of joy in Jesus, like the Apostle Paul, are most unnatural. Paul actually had the assumption that followers of Christ would experience joy in their life. In his most obnoxious letter, the Epistle to the Philippians, written to this town and to these very people, in a scant 104 verses, you could read this book as you eat your Weetabix in the morning, as you are layering your toast with Marmite. No? As you're eating your breakfast, your frosted flakes, you could read through Philippians. And out of these 104 verses, there are 14 verses which mention joy. And a half dozen other verses that talk about having a worry-free, stress-free life. Do all things without grumbling, Paul says. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. I have learned the secret of being content in all circumstances. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Silence, Paul! Miserable apostle, you nauseate me. You're a three-decker sauerkraut and toadstool sandwich with arsenic sauce. Let us leave this disturbing, dreary subject of joy before I start working myself up. You don't want that to happen. Point number 4 comes from chapter 17. And the point is this: if you want to avoid evangelism, avoid making Jesus real to people. Let's look at verses 2 and 3 of chapter 17. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Christ, he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas. You say, so what? Well, so what? We said that Paul was a master communicator. Well, in these verses, we see the proof. You see, Paul, as he speaks to people, has the ability to vary or tinker with his message depending on his audience. To make his Messiah real, he varies his approach. Did you notice the variety of words that are used here to refer to Paul's communication? It says he reasoned, he explained, he proved, he persuaded. So what, you say? Well, here we go. Evidence that Paul is a good, masterful speaker. He understands that sometimes you have to speak as a philosopher. You have to reason with your audience and marshal logic to best make your case. Sometimes you must speak as a teacher and organize your data in a systematic way that they would understand. Sometimes you speak as a lawyer and you You make the case to achieve the proper verdict. And sometimes you simply must speak and preach and proclaim, for many people have hard hearts, and even if they know that what you are saying is true, they will not embrace it. And so you must move past their intellect and address their conscience and use your words like a hammer to chisel away at their hardened hearts. Sometimes you must speak as a salesman and show them the need for what you're offering. Well, I imagine there would be times that sometimes you would have to dress up in a silly costume and adopt an outrageous accent to make your point. Your Jesus compared evangelism to fishing, which, when you consider the complexity of the human heart, is an apt metaphor. The experienced angler knows that certain types of bait are required to catch certain types of fish. My point should be obvious. Do you see how complicated this endeavor of evangelism is? To do it even halfway well, you have to listen, not only with your ears, but with your heart. You have to be able to follow where the conversation is going, like a kite in a wind, as it bobs and weaves hither and yon. You have to develop subtle skills of empathy, which few master well. Why, you must even take classes and read books and experiment with all of this. I understand your pastor has been teaching you a Sunday school class, where he has specifically been teaching you how to share your faith. I hope those of you attending are few in number and are finding it to be a perfect waste of time. And those of you who could not be bothered to attend even one session of this ballyhoo, well, bravo to you. Who can be bothered with this? Certainly not busy people such as yourselves. No, my friends, if you wish to avoid evangelism, then avoid the attempt to make Jesus real to others. Why, with many of you, he's not even real to you, so this shouldn't be too hard. Well, point number 5, a fifth behavior to avoid. If you wish to avoid evangelism, avoid any sort of regular Bible reading or study. Look at verses 10 through 12. As soon as it was night, the brothers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. On arriving there, they went to the Jewish synagogue. Now, the Bereans were of more noble character than the Thessalonians, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. And many of the Jews believed. It's my observation that those who are the most ardent witnesses for their faith are those who display a dreadful love and working knowledge of this book. You develop the habit of reading this regularly or systematically, God forbid daily. You know what's going to happen. You're soon going to want to share it with others. How informative it is, how inspiring it is. Why, some of you will even say that you are having communion with the risen Christ as you read the Bible. What made these Bereans noble of character, though that is a matter of opinion, was their insatiable love for the Word of God. Now, when I asked your pastor, why my lectures had caused his faith in Jesus to grow, do you know what he said? He acted like these Berean Christians. In my lectures, I would give reasons, multiple reasons, abundant reasons, good reasons, why the Bible was to be regarded as just another ordinary book penned by men and only men. And then whilst it certainly should be respected as an example of ancient literature, it should not be studied as the Word of God or revered as sacred. certainly have no power to change anyone's life. Well, do you know what your pastor did? After class, he gathered up his books and notes and sallied forth to the university library, where he spent hours after the lecture poring through books and magazines to see if my arguments held any water, had any merit. And do you know what he said to me? That based on his research, he found that most of what I shared was mere conjecture, mere opinion. Why, he said that most of what I offered in my lecture was not factual, but displayed a preordained agenda. Why, he said the facts, the truth was more on his side. That the Bible was remarkably reliable in its history, accurate in its assertions, stunning in its prophecy. And when it spoke how best to live our lives morally and spiritually, that the Bible was spot on. But he didn't stop there. No, brazen freshman. He looked me in the eyes and said, "And Professor Gnostic, you should conform your life to the principles and precepts of this book. Why? You ought to bow your knees to the Jesus to which these words point." He said that my lectures convinced him as nothing else could to trust the Bible and build his life upon it and devote his life to sharing its truth with others. I created a monster. No, my friends, put the book far from you, high on your bookcase, the highest shelf. Keep it away from you. And if it must be within reach, then use it as a bin for the storing of recipes or important letters. At least that way, it will have some use to you. Well, the hour has passed. Time, as it always does, swiftly flies away until it carries us inexorably into the midst of nothingness. I trust, my friends, as you think about our time here today, that I have encouraged you to step out of the darkness and into the light. That I have motivated you afresh to give your lives to the right things and to stop wasting time with myths and trivialities. I trust you are inspired now to give yourselves wholeheartedly to the things that matter most. If that is the end result of the time we have spent together today, then I will be able to lay my head on my pillow this evening with a smile saying, "Professor Gnostic, job well done." Thank you, my friends. Perhaps in another 20 years, we'll see you again.